August 19th, 1942, 3:40 in the morning, English Channel, Nautical Sector, Charlie Zebra. The world is reduced to three primary sensations that dominate the basal nervous system of every man aboard the LCA landing craft: the cloying smell of burnt diesel mixed with acidic vomit on the damp wooden deck, the taste of metallic salt carried by the icy sea spray that cuts the skin like a dull razor, and the ceaseless vibration, that tectonic hum of the twin Ford V8 engines shaking bones down to the teeth. Sergeant William James Thompson, 32 years old, a former steelworker from Hamilton, Ontario, now a platoon leader in the Royal Regiment of Canada, crouches in the claustrophobic darkness of vessel number 137. His hands, calloused not by war but by a decade of underpaid industrial labor during the Great Depression, grip the cold wood of his Sten Mark II submachine gun stock. He is not shivering from the cold, though the water temperature outside is 12 degrees. The rigidity in his jaw and the fixed dilation of his pupils, invisible in the absolute blackness of the channel, betray a state of hypervigilance bordering on catatonia. Thompson has seen death. He has seen factory accidents where molten steel behaved like living water. He has seen men crushed by hydraulic presses in absolute silence, but he has never seen what is about to happen. No one has. Until this moment, the Second World War for these 6,000 men was an abstraction of newspapers, muddy training in Sussex, and censored letters. William Thompson is part of a statistic that, in a few hours, will be studied by historians with a mixture of horror and disbelief. 5,000 Canadian soldiers, 1,000 British, 50 American Rangers, an armada of 237 ships. They are the spearhead of an operation designated Jubilee. The official objective is to test Hitler's defenses, capture a port, gather intelligence, and leave victorious before sunset. It is a lightning raid. It is a show of force. It is, according to the planners in London sitting in rooms with oak panelling and clean maps, a calculated risk. But their math contains a hidden variable, a catastrophic calculation error that Thompson feels in his gut, though he cannot verbalize it. He looks at the shadowed faces of his men, boys of 18, 19. Private Robert Bobby Miller, who lied about his age to enlist and whose father fought at Vimy Ridge. Corporal Frederick Ross, who planned to open a mechanic shop in Vancouver. They are less than 16 kilometers from the French coast. Darkness was supposed to be their ally. Surprise was supposed to be their armor. In theory, the Germans are asleep in their barracks, complacent, ignorant, vulnerable. In theory, the Dieppe garrison consists of second-rate troops, old men, and the wounded in recovery. But military theory dies upon first contact with visceral reality. What Thompson does not know, what British intelligence failed to capture with their ultra-intercepts and high-altitude reconnaissance flights, is that the element of surprise has already evaporated. At 3:47 in the morning, 13 minutes ago, the eastern flank of the flotilla collided, by pure cosmic and malignant chance, with a small German coastal convoy. Shots were fired, the sky lit up, and on land, on the limestone cliffs that rise like giant tombstones over the pebble beaches of Dieppe, black bakelite field phones began to ring. They are not asleep. They are not tired old men. They are the 302nd Static Infantry Division, reinforced alert, and they are waiting with fingers on the triggers of weapons that can fire 1,200 rounds per minute. Thompson and his 670 men of the Royal Regiment are sailing not into a battle, but into a meticulously designed industrial slaughterhouse. To understand why Puey's Beach, military designation Blue Beach, would represent such a devastating psychological shock to the Canadian Army, a trauma that would be etched into the national DNA for generations, one must go back in time, not just months, but years, and dissect the mind of the enemy awaiting them. The German command in the West did not operate under the illusion of security, but under the paranoid certainty of Festung Europa, Fortress Europe. The German defensive doctrine of 1942 was not just about concrete and steel. It was an area denial philosophy based on the geometry of death. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, a Prussian aristocrat of the old guard who viewed war with the cold detachment of a chess player, had instilled a simple principle in his subordinates. The invasion must be stopped at the waterline, not inland, not in the cities, on the wet sand where the enemy is most vulnerable, seasick, slow, and without cover. German technical confidence rested on specifications that the Allies criminally underestimated. They trusted the MG-42, the Maschinengewehr 42, A bone saw that in the hands of a veteran operator created a zone of interdiction where human survival was biologically impossible. They trusted reinforced concrete regelbau bunkers, standardized structures with walls 2 meters thick, immune to everything except a direct hit from heavy naval artillery, something the light escort destroyers accompanying Thompson did not possess. This was not ignorance on the Germans' part. It was an epistemological failure of the Allies. German intelligence, the Abwehr, knew something was coming. They monitored radio traffic in southern England. They saw the build-up of landing craft in the ports of New Haven and Southampton. What they did not grasp, what they could not internalize until the dawn of August 19th, was the suicidal audacity of attacking a fortified port frontally. To the German military mind, trained in the logic of blitzkrieg and attacking Dieppe head-on, was tactically insane. And yet, they prepared for this insanity. They placed barbed wire not just on the beach, but submerged at low tide. They mined the approaches. They calculated the firing angles of every machine gun nest to ensure there was not a single square inch of beach that could not be saturated by crossing lead. The tragic irony of German preparation is that they spent tons of steel, thousands of hours of slave labor from the organization TOT, and millions of Reichsmarks to defend against a full-scale invasion, when what was coming towards them was a test raid. A test that would cost real blood to answer theoretical questions. The German garrison at Dieppe possessed an advantage that even their commanders had not planned: geology. The beach was not soft sand. It was shale, chert pebbles hard and smooth, stones the size of potatoes that, under mortar impact, turned into lethal secondary shrapnel, and which, under the tracks of Churchill tanks, acted like ball bearings, immobilizing armored vehicles in a sliding gravel trap. But let us return to the man about to step into this geological hell. William James Thompson was born on March 12, 1910. The son of Scottish immigrants, he grew up in the shadow of the smokestacks of Hamilton, a city forged in soot and steel. His father, Edward, had left a lung in the mud of Passchendaele in the First War and spent the rest of his life coughing blood and bitterness into a filthy handkerchief. His mother, Sarah, washed clothes for the local elite until her hands were so red and swollen she couldn't hold a teacup. William was the second of 4 brothers. He wanted to be an architect. He had notebooks full of sketches of buildings that defied gravity, structures of light and glass that would never be built. The crash of 1929 killed that dream with the efficiency of a shot to the nape of the neck. Instead of university, he went to the assembly line. Instead of drawing the future, he hammered the present. Enlistment in 1939 was not an act of blind patriotism. It was an escape. Escape from poverty, escape from lack of purpose, escape from the look of silent disappointment from his dying father. Thompson's military journey was a succession of agonizing waits, punctuated by moments of controlled terror. Basic training in Canada was a shock of physical reality, but it was in England that the soldier's soul was forged. 2 years of exercises, 2 years marching under English rain, digging trenches that would be filled the next day, simulating attacks on empty villages. He became a demolitions expert, selected not by an aptitude test, but because his sergeant noticed he had steady worker's hands. His instructor, a British sergeant major with an impenetrable accent and a scar running from ear to chin, taught him that explosives were not about noise but about precision. "You don't want to blow up the world, Thompson," he would say. "You want to cut its artery." Thompson internalized this. He learned to respect the power of cordite and TNT, but there was a moral dilemma growing inside him like a benign tumor, invisible but palpable. He didn't hate the Germans. He barely knew them. In his most honest moments, lying in his bunk staring at the corrugated metal roof of the Nissen hut, he wondered if the man on the other side, the German he was supposed to kill, also had hidden sketchbooks and a mother with swollen hands. He rationalized, of course. "It's them or us," he told himself. "The world needs to be free." Ready-made phrases, recruitment poster slogans he repeated like a mantra to silence the doubt. In a letter to his wife Martha, written 3 days before embarkation, a letter she would only read weeks later, stained with tears, he wrote, "I don't know if I'm brave, Martha. I just know I'm tired of waiting. Whatever happens, let it happen soon. I want to come home and draw a house for us, a house with big windows." That wait was about to end, but not in the way Thompson imagined. The technology the Canadians were bringing to Dieppe, specifically the Churchill tanks modified for the landing, was a marvel of rushed engineering, officially designated as Infantry Tank Mach 4, A-22. To the soldiers, they were 40-ton beasts of tempered steel. To the engineers, the 350-horsepower Bedford Twin-6 engine was a feat of torque. But there was a critical flaw, a visceral nuance that no test on British soil had revealed. The Churchill's tracks were designed for traction in mud and dirt. The shale of Dieppe, those round stones polished by the sea for millennia, did not behave like dirt. It behaved like a viscous fluid. When a 20-ton steel track tries to gain traction on loose stones on a 15-degree incline, basic physics dictates that the stones move, not the tank. The tank sinks. It becomes an immobile 40-ton bunker, a static target for German 37mm and 75mm anti-tank artillery that already had the beach coordinates marked on their firing maps with millimeter precision. And then there was the weapon that would define the massacre, the MG-42. To the Germans it was the Maschinengewehr 42. To the Allies it would be known as Hitler's buzzsaw, or the zipper, due to the sound it made, not a distinct tat-tat-tat, but a continuous tearing of fabric, a brrrt that sounded like linen being ripped by a giant. The barrel of the MG-42, made of chrome molybdenum alloy, heated to 500 degrees Celsius after 200 continuous rounds. Doctrine required a barrel change every 3 seconds of sustained fire, an operation a well-trained crew executed in 4 seconds, using asbestos gloves. The 7.92mm projectile, traveling at 755 meters per second, did not just pierce human flesh. At that rate of fire, it disintegrated the structural integrity of the body. A single man hit by a half-second burst received not 1 or 2 bullets, but 5 or 6, turning bone to powder and organs to unrecognizable pulp before the brain even registered the pain. The German defensive system at Dieppe functioned like an industrial meat processing machine. First, the Freya radar, positioned atop the cliffs, scanned the horizon, emitting invisible electromagnetic pulses, detecting the flotilla's approach long before the human eye could see through the morning mist. The information flowed to command centers in underground bunkers, where officers traced vectors on acetate maps with wax pencils. Next, the coastal artillery batteries received the coordinates. And finally, the machine guns, positioned in concrete nests with crossing fields of fire, enfilade fire, waited. The concept of enfilade is crucial to understanding the carnage to come. If you shoot head-on at a line of soldiers, you hit one, and the bullet stops. If you shoot from the side, from the flank, a single bullet can pass through 3-4 men. The Germans positioned their weapons to fire parallel to the beach, creating an invisible wall of lead that the Canadians would have to walk through. There was nowhere to hide. August 19th, 4:50 in the morning. The sky to the east begins to bleed a pale grey, diluting the total darkness. The sound of the engines changes pitch, lowering the RPMs. Sergeant Thompson feels the launch slow, and the hull scrape against something solid, not sand but stone. The sound is horrible, like grinding teeth. The bow ramp of the LCA drops with a metallic clang that reverberates like a funeral gong. Go! 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 The officer's scream is swallowed by the immediate and deafening roar of hell opening up. Thompson throws himself forward, his leather boots hitting water that reaches his knees, and then the slippery stones. The world explodes. It is not a metaphor. The air fills with earth, water, smoke, and metal. The first thing he notices is not the sound, but the pressure. The shock waves from mortar explosions compress his chest, forcing the air from his lungs. The smell of cordite is instant and overwhelming, an acrid taste of sulfur and ammonia burning the back of the throat. Beside him, Private Miller, the boy who lied about his age, takes 2 steps and his head simply disappears in a red cloud, vaporized by a 20mm shell from a Flak 38 anti-aircraft gun lowered for direct fire. Miller's body remains standing for an impossible second, nerve reflexes still sending signals to legs that no longer have a central command, before collapsing into the crimson-stained surf. Thompson runs. The movement is pure reptilian instinct. He runs toward the seawall, the only visible cover, a 3-meter-high concrete barrier at the top of the beach. But the beach is long, 200 meters of loose, exposed stones. The sound of bullets passing him is a continuous, supersonic crack, like whips snapping next to his ears. Zip crack, zip crack. He sees men falling to his left and right, not like in the movies where they throw their arms up and spin dramatically, but like rag dolls having their strings cut. They simply collapse, crumpled, inert. Corporal Ross, the mechanic, is screaming. holding what remains of his left arm, blood spurting arterially, black in the dim light of dawn, painting the grey stones. Thompson cannot stop. The number one rule of the landing: stop and you die. Move and maybe you die. He stumbles, stones rolling under his feet, the weight of his pack and ammunition pulling him down. He falls face first onto the cold, wet shale, the taste of salt and blood in his mouth. An MG-42 burst tears the air exactly where his head was half a second before, bullets raising geysers of pulverized stone that hit his face like glass shards. He looks up. The cliff top is alive with muzzle flashes. They are firing from high ground down. It is shooting fish in a barrel. Thompson crawls, dragging himself over the bodies of his comrades, men with whom he shared cigarettes and bad jokes the night before. He sees Private Jenkins' face, eyes open, glazed, staring at the grey sky with an expression of childlike surprise. Jenkins has a hole the size of a fist in his chest. The visceral nature of the scene is overwhelming. There is no glory here. There is no Wagnerian heroism. There is only soft flesh being torn apart by hardened steel on an industrial scale. The noise is so intense it becomes silence. Thompson's eardrums collapse protectively, filtering screams and explosions into a muffled, distant hum, as if he were underwater. He sees his lieutenant's mouth moving, shouting orders, but no sound comes out. Then the lieutenant falls, cut in half by a heavy machine gun burst. Thompson is now in command of a platoon that has already lost half its men in less than 3 minutes. He reaches the seawall. He is gasping, heart beating against his ribs like a caged animal trying to escape. He leans against the cold concrete, shaking, trying to wipe sand and blood from his eyes. Around him, other survivors huddle, eyes wide, white with terror, in faces blackened by soot and camouflage. They look to him for an answer, for a plan, for anything that makes sense. But Thompson has no answers. He looks at the seawall. There is barbed wire at the top, and beyond the wire the esplanade of Dieppe, and beyond the esplanade the houses turned into fortresses, and beyond the houses the Germans who never knew they were coming until it was too late for the Canadians, not for them. The irony is a bitter taste of bile. Tactical surprise was achieved, but in reverse. It was the Canadians who were surprised by the ferocity of the reception. Thompson checks his sten. The magazine is full. He pulls the bolt. The metallic click is tiny against the cacophony of battle. He knows they won't take the town. He knows with a cold, terrible clarity that the mission has now changed. It is no longer about capturing a port. It is about surviving the next 5 minutes, and then the next 5. On the other side of the firing line, in bunker WN-37, Gefreiter, Corporal Hans Müller, 22 years old, a native of Hamburg, is sweating, not from fear, but from physical exertion and heat. The bunker smells of hot oil, gunpowder smoke and sour human sweat. Müller is the loader for the MG-42. His hands move in a trained blur, feeding metal belts of 7.90mm cartridges into the hungry breech of the weapon. His partner, the gunner, is hunched over the sight, body shaking with the weapon's violent recoil. The bunker floor is covered in a carpet of spent brass casings that tinkle like falling coins. Müller does not see the Canadians as individual human beings. Through the narrow firing slit, he sees only dark shapes moving on the grey beach, silhouettes that must be knocked down. It is mechanical work. A line, fire, correct, fire. The barrel is smoking. "Wexel! Change!" screams the gunner. Müller grabs the asbestos glove, opens the side latch. The glowing barrel jumps out, sizzling as it hits the concrete floor. In 3 seconds, a cold barrel is inserted. The latch closed, the belt refed. Feuer. The killing resumes. Müller does not know Thompson's name. He does not know about the architectural drawings or the washerwoman mother. He only knows that if those dark shapes reach the seawall, they will throw grenades into the bunker, and then he will die. So he feeds the machine. The logic of total war has reduced 2 men, Thompson and Müller, to functional components of opposing systems of destruction, separated by 200 meters of beach and an abysmal ideology. The Canadian radio technology fails spectacularly. The number 19 and number 38 portable radios, soaked by seawater and damaged by impacts, are useless dead weight. Communication between the beach and the command ships, where generals await news of success, is fragmented, confused, or non-existent. Major General Roberts aboard the HMS Calpe is blind. He receives truncated messages. Landed, heavy fire, casualties. He cannot see that Blue Beach is a slaughterhouse. Based on incomplete information, and the erroneous assumption that the first wave had partial success, he makes the fatal decision to send in the reserve. The Fusiliers Mont Royal regiment is ordered to land. 600 more men are being sent directly into the same annihilation zone, where Thompson is huddled against the seawall. It is a tragedy of compounded errors, a domino effect of intelligence and communication failures that amplifies the disaster by the minute. When the Fusiliers' launches approach, the Germans on the cliffs can barely believe their luck. More targets, the same beach, the same inevitable result. As Thompson watches, paralyzed, a new wave of landing craft approaches through the smoke. He feels a wave of nausea that has nothing to do with the sea. He wants to scream, wants to wave, wants to tell them to turn back, to turn around and flee to England. But he is a sergeant, not a god. He is merely an eyewitness trapped at the epicenter of an event that defies rational understanding. He sees a soldier beside him, a boy with a face covered in sand and blood, trying to place a field dressing on an eviscerating abdominal wound. The boy's hands slip in the blood. He looks at Thompson and whispers, "Sergeant, I want my mother." The phrase is a cliché, something Thompson read in cheap war books, but hearing it there whispered with the absolute sincerity of one who knows he is dying breaks something inside him that will never be repaired. The architecture of his soul, already shaken by poverty and waiting, collapses silently. He holds the boy's hand. It is the only thing he can do. The hand is cold. The boy stops shaking. Thompson lets go of the hand and picks up his Sten again. Rage replaces fear, a cold, white, purifying rage. He stands up, peering over the seawall. He sees a glint of a helmet in a window 100 meters away. He aims. He fires. It is a futile gesture against concrete and steel, but it is an affirmation of existence. "I am still here," the shot says. "You haven't killed me yet." The Battle of Dieppe was not decided by brilliant strategy or individual courage. It was decided by the physics of ballistics and unforgiving geography. It was a confrontation between vulnerable flesh and entrenched defensive technology. And as the sun climbed higher in the sky, illuminating the carnage with a raw, indifferent light, it became clear that the only thing the Canadians would be taking back to England that day was not victory, nor prisoners, nor the town. They would take back the trauma of a generation and the bitter lesson that bravery alone does not stop a high-velocity machine gun bullet. Thompson looks at his watch. 5:15 in the morning. Only an hour and a half has passed. It feels like a lifetime, and the day is just beginning. The worst, he suspects with growing horror, is yet to come. The tide is rising, shortening the beach, pushing the living, the wounded, and the dead against the seawall, compressing the kill zone into a narrow strip of concentrated suffering. And the Germans, now fully awake, fully ammunitioned, and methodically efficient, are just starting to adjust their aim. As the massacre at Blue Beach crystallized into a silence of death, punctuated only by the groans of the dying, that the rising tide threatened to drown, 3 kilometers to the west, on the beaches designated white and red, the mechanical drama of Operation Jubilee was entering its most grotesque and cynically industrial phase. It was 5:20 in the morning, and the sun was no longer a promise but a pitiless spotlight exposing the central fallacy of the Allied plan, the belief that infantry courage could overcome the geometry of ballistics. The Royal Hamilton Light Infantry and the Essex Scottish Regiment tasked with the main assault approached the shoreline not under the cover of darkness, as planned, but under the grey clarity of a summer morning, perfectly framed in the Zeiss telescopic sights of German gunners entrenched in the formidable Dieppe Casino and the western cliffs. What followed was not a battle. It was an exercise in applied physics where 70-kilogram human bodies, composed mostly of water and carbon, collided with steel and lead projectiles traveling at 3 times the speed of sound. The air, saturated with cordite smoke and the sickly smell of rotting seaweed, vibrated with an intensity that made teeth ache, a cacophony of explosions that allowed no rational thought, only animal reaction. But the centerpiece of this tragedy, the element that would transform defeat into technical humiliation, was about to touch the beach. The 29 Churchill tanks of the 14th Army Tank Regiment, the Calgary Regiment. Delayed by navigation errors, they arrived 15 minutes after the infantry, 15 crucial minutes where the riflemen were left naked, without armor, being systematically dismembered by the MG-42s sweeping the esplanade. When the ramps of the tank landing craft LCT finally dropped, Lieutenant Colonel Johnny Andrews believed the tide of battle would turn, that the 102 millimeters of armor on his Churchills would crush the Nazi resistance like insects. He was wrong. He had not considered geology. The beach at Dieppe is not made of sand. It is composed of flint pebbles, hard stones, round and polished by the sea, known locally as galettes. To a tourist, they are picturesque. To a 40-ton tank, they are solid quicksand. As soon as the first Churchill, christened Cougar, touched the beach and tried to gain traction, the stones rolled under its steel tracks. The 350 horsepower engine roared. The track spun frantically, throwing stones like lethal shrapnel backward, but the tank did not move. It dug its own grave. The colossal weight of the vehicle caused it to sink to the chassis in the unstable gravel, transforming Britain's heaviest war machine into an immobile and impotent bunker, a $32,000 target practice object. One by one, the tanks landed and met the same geological fate. Of the 29 that exited the landing craft, 15 became immobilized in the surf zone, their crews trapped inside steel coffins that rang like bells with every anti-tank shell impact. For German radio operator Heinrich Weiss, positioned in a bunker on the west flank with a 50mm Pak-38 anti-tank gun, the scene was of an almost offensive tactical simplicity. He didn't need to calculate lead for moving targets. The Canadian tanks were stationary, lined up like ducks at a fair. "Panzer, 11 o'clock, static," he would whisper into his throat microphone, and his gunner would fire. The tungsten core projectile would hit the exposed Churchill track, shattering the steel pins with a crack louder than the shot itself, permanently immobilizing the vehicle. Inside the tanks, the situation was one of indescribable claustrophobic terror. The sound of machine gun bullets and shrapnel drumming on the hull was deafening, a continuous storm of metallic hail. When an armor-piercing shell penetrated, the physics of the interior changed instantly. Air pressure spiked, bursting eardrums, while fragments of white-hot metal ricocheted off the inner walls, turning the crew into pulp. Corporal George "Red" Mulligan, driver of the tank Burt, smelled burnt rubber and singed flesh when a shell hit the engine compartment, igniting the fuel. He tried to open the bottom escape hatch, but it was blocked by the damn flintstones. He screamed, but the intercom was dead. Mulligan would die asphyxiated by the toxic fumes of his own vehicle, mere meters from freedom, trapped by the very land he had come to liberate. Meanwhile, the infantry outside were living their own nightmare. The plan required the sappers, combat engineers, to run to the concrete seawall, place explosive charges, and blow breaches for the tanks to pass into the town. But the sappers were priority targets for German snipers. Carrying heavy packs filled with TNT, they were slow and visible. A well-placed shot to the pack didn't just kill the man, it vaporized him, taking out anyone within a 5-meter radius. The sapper captain, seeing his men being cut down one by one before even reaching the barbed wire, grabbed a Bangalore torpedo himself and ran. He took 10 steps. A machine gun burst, cut his legs off at the knees. He fell, still conscious, staring at his own amputated limbs with shocked bewilderment, before trying incredibly to keep crawling with the charge. He died seconds later, not from enemy fire, but from massive blood loss, his heart pumping his life onto the grey stones of Dieppe in final rhythmic spurts. In the center of the beach, the casino building, an elegant white structure that in peacetime heard the sound of roulette wheels and laughter, had been transformed by the Germans into an impregnable fortress. Windows were bricked up with concrete, leaving only slits for machine guns. The ballroom housed an anti-tank gun. For the men of the Hamilton Regiment, taking the casino wasn't an option. It was the only chance for survival. The attack on the building was a combat of medieval savagery, fought with automatic weapons. Sergeant Pierre Frenchy Leblanc led a small group through a minefield, kicking bodies to clear a path to the side door. They breached. The interior of the casino was a labyrinth of smoke and darkness pierced by muzzle flashes. They fought corridor by corridor, room by room. Grenades were thrown and thrown back before exploding. Men fought hand-to-hand with knives and rifle butts when ammunition ran dry. Leblanc cornered 3 German gunners in the kitchen. He didn't ask for surrender, and they didn't offer it. He pulled the pin of a number 36 Mills grenade, counted to 2, and rolled it across the tiled floor. The explosion in the confined space turned the kitchen into a slaughterhouse, mixing flour, broken china, and viscera. But for every silenced German position, there seemed to be 2 new ones. The casino was a trap. And above all this, in the merciless blue sky, unfolded the largest air battle the world had ever seen in a single day. The Royal Air Force had promised an umbrella of protection. Instead, it delivered an aerial meat grinder. 800 Spitfire and Hurricane fighters battled 500 Luftwaffe fighters, Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s, converging from all over France and Belgium. The sky was streaked with contrails and black smoke from downed planes. For the soldiers on the beach, the air battle was just a terrifying background noise. The whine of Daimler-Benz and Rolls-Royce Merlin engines at full power, punctuated by the occasional rain of burning aluminum and bodies of pilots falling without parachutes. A German Dornier 217, hit by ship anti-aircraft fire, spiraled down over the beach, its engines howling like wounded beasts, and exploded in the surf, launching a wave of burning fuel over the wounded, trying to hide in the water. War had saturated every element. The earth was mined, the sea was red, and the air was full of metal. But the greatest tragedy was still unfolding at sea, aboard the destroyer HMS Calpe, the command ship. Major General Roberts, the architect of this catastrophe, was operating in near total blindness. Smoke screens laid by ships and planes to protect the troops, combined with battle smoke, had created an impenetrable fog obscuring the beach. Radios kept failing or transmitting fragmented and contradictory messages. When a truncated message arrived saying, "Essex Scottish crossed the beach," Roberts interpreted this as success, a breakthrough of defences. He did not know that "cross the beach" meant a handful of terrified men had managed to reach the seawall and were now pinned down, unable to advance or retreat. Based on this tactical hallucination, Roberts made the decision that would seal the fate of hundreds more men. He ordered the reserves sent in. The Fusiliers Mont Royal, 600 fresh men, eager, ignorant of the horror awaiting them, were ordered to board their landing craft and head for Red Beach. They were sailing directly into a kill zone, where fire density was such that survival was statistically improbable. When the Fusiliers' boats emerged from the smokescreen, the German gunners on the cliffs could barely believe their eyes. It was as if the enemy were committing suicide in slow motion, repeating the same mistake, in the same place, with the same blind obstinacy. The machine guns, which had cooled slightly during a lull in fighting, opened fire with renewed vigor. The massacre that followed was so complete that many boats arrived at the beach filled only with corpses. Lieutenant Guy Tremblay of the Fusiliers jumped from his boat into waist-deep water and felt something hit his chest like a sledgehammer. He looked down and saw that his radio, strapped to his chest, had been shattered by a bullet, saving his life by millimeters. He looked at the beach and saw hell, bodies piled upon bodies, men using friends' corpses as sandbags. He saw a soldier sitting in the sand, holding his own intestines with his hands, crying silently as the tide rose around him. Tremblay realized in that instant of crystalline clarity that precedes panic or acceptance that there was no plan, no reinforcements, no victory. There was only death, administered with Prussian efficiency. It was 9 in the morning. The battle had been lost 3 hours ago, but the killing would continue for 4 more. The withdrawal, when finally ordered, would be the last cruel act of this opera of errors. Rescue boats would have to enter that firestorm once more, trying to fish out desperate survivors swimming toward them, clutching gunwales with crushed fingers, many being shot in the water as they tried to be saved. The sea around Dieppe changed color, a sickening shade of dark pink stretching for hundreds of meters from the shore. And amidst it all, the ceaseless, mechanical, indifferent sound of the MG-42 continued to tear the air, the sound of an industrial century devouring its own children.